All right, welcome to everybody. Thank you all for coming out, and welcome to the, what day is it, October 21st, 2019 work session of the Falls Church City Council. We are delighted to have as our first item a discussion about improving accessibility here in the city. I know it's been a priority of these past years to improve walkability, bikeability, and I think this just goes in keeping what we've done these past years, and we tried to raise the bar in development and new projects and the like. And we're fortunate to have an expert on those issues, Rosemary Chiotti, who I've had the pleasure of working with in Arlington, who's on the Planning Commission, I guess, for about 9 years or so. Yeah, as chair, and a number of other committees, and speaking all over the place on these kind of issues. And so we thought she might help us with our discussion about those kind of issues and give us some ideas how we might improve things throughout the city, but also in new development as well, and what sort of things you might want to consider either asking for or requiring. And I know a lot of people feel the ADA is kind of, well, I've done the ADA, I'm done. And I think probably you're here tonight to tell us there's many more things that you can do to make this community accessible for all that are above and beyond maybe what the ADA may require. So I guess without further ado, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say, Mr. Shields, before we get started.
Well, thank you, Mayor Tarter, and welcome, Ms. Chiotti. Cindy Mester is the city's ADA coordinator, and Cindy's been in touch with Ms. Chiotti as well. Really at the, when Mayor Tarter mentioned to you his experience and the county's experience in working with you. But I think tonight, as the mayor just said, is a chance for us to listen and get some advice on making sure that our community is accessible and welcoming to everybody. And that includes through the development review and approval process. We do a lot of our things similarly to Arlington County, where we have voluntary concessions and conditions with site plans. But also, as we're doing capital improvements for the city itself, our own streets, our own buildings. We've got a library project that's about to get underway soon. So there are lots of opportunities for us. So welcome. Glad to hear what you have to say.
And I take my hat off to Ms. Mester that I can't even begin to compete with her knowledge base. What I bring to the table is perhaps how practical experience led me to the Planning Commission table. I'm a nurse practitioner by trade. When I became disabled, I didn't know anything about the ADA or people with disabilities, but I landed in Arlington because that's where people said you should. I was way out in the suburbs. And my career had to be remade. And I wound up starting my own practice, and I take care of people with spinal cord injuries who live in the community. I do house calls. Their places are accessible, and they've got attendants. Now, there's no two disabilities that are the same. So most of my patients have spinal cord injuries. They're powers or quadriplegics, and it's paralyzed from the neck down. And, you know, I was always, ran large clinics, worked in hospitals, had taught at Penn Medical, at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. And I saw it from the medical side, but not the user side in the home. So what I saw when I first started was I had a patient who wound up on a ventilator in Nova Fairfax. She had developed pneumonia. She was in a snowstorm at night waiting for somebody to walk by to open the door to her apartment building. And then there were lots of things like that. And then small things. And then I saw that my patients, and we're all adults here, my patients, from the time they became spinal cord injured, moved into an apartment that they could move around in. The type A units, as you know, 2% of multifamily dwellings have to have a fully ADA accessible apartments.
Why don't you, not to interrupt, why don't you explain that? Because I'm not sure everybody knows type A and all the rest.
Type A, most are type A. Type A is fully accessible, where the counters in the kitchen will be lower. You'll have doors that can open. You can get your knees under the sink. You don't have any sinks in the kitchen that are like in a corner. It's really prescribed, the clearance. Bathrooms have to have grab bars. It's a prescribed clearance in front of the sink that you can get under. The toilet, how it's arranged with the clearance spaces on either side between that and a tub. If there's a shower, with the clear spaces in front of that. So they're fully accessible. And that's where we come down to the bathtub. So my patients, I saw, once you have a high enough spinal cord injury, I said, we're all adults, you're only going to go to the bathroom with like a suppository. They do it 3 times a week. They have plastic wheelchairs for quads to be transferred in, and then they can be rolled into the shower. Everything happens in the bed with an assistant. But if they have only a bathtub for the rest of their life, they're going to do everything in the bed, and they're only going to get sponge baths. And I found that a lot of the lack of self-esteem, the depression, was from the lack of ability to be hygienic. And year after year of this. And this is the built environment that we're in the position to do something about. The Fair Housing Act allows bathtubs or roll-in showers to be in these type A units. But we are creatures of habit, and we only put bathtubs in. Bathtubs for quadriplegic or paraplegic, you might as well grow tomatoes. It's useless. And everybody can use a zero threshold shower. So when I started down this road, I started working with Habitat for Humanity because they were struggling with this. Now, this was 20 years ago. And they couldn't spend another dime or 2 more nails to make their first floors, all their units, fully accessible. And they were interested in my story. And so they did a prototype, and they found out it was not a nickel more and not a nail more to do it. And they were worried about water incursion with that. So they did some prototypes. They had no water problems, and it didn't cost another more. So from here on, all of their first floor units are all roll-in showers. So then I went with Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. I was chair of one of their projects. I approached them. They sent them to talk to Habitat. They said, let's try it. They have stick construction. They have no problems. And also I got them to do power doors. Back to my patients who sit outside in the rain and bad weather waiting for somebody to walk by to open a door for them. So then I started with private contractors. So every time a private contractor would come in with a multifamily dwelling, I'd approach them. At the same time, our soldiers were coming back from Iraq. And a lot of them had terrible blast injuries. And as you know, this area gets a lot of defense contractors. Our soldiers get first dibs on jobs. There's an affirmative hiring. And they're going to live near transit. And I spoke to each of the developers as they were coming in with projects, and we do have a lot of them in Arlington. And I said, you can thank our soldiers. Everybody was thanking our vets, thanking them for their sacrifice, thanking them. And I said, you can do this in a way that none of us can. And I told them my stories. And I said, you could make your type A units fully accessible, and you will give them the dignity of a shower every day for the rest of their lives. Only you can do that. And they started signing up. And now I think I have a commitment for about 60 roll-in showers in our type A units. And we now have a permanent site plan condition for power doors. Now we're Dillon State, and you have to be very careful. And so one by one over the years, I got each developer to sign on to power doors. And then after I'd run through every developer, I said, okay, now let's try for permanent site plan condition. Well, all these years I've been going developer by developer, but then I brought one of our dear friends, Doris Ray, to the table. And she says, well, you know what? Title III, Title II demands full access. You can't have full access if you can't get in the door. Now, you have choices. You can either have a doorman, You could have a doorbell and somebody's immediately going to come open the door, or you can have a power door. Those are the three ways you guarantee access. Your choice. I spent 10 years at this. She says one sentence, we had a permanent site plan condition, and the rest is history. But in a way, the developers actually said we thought it always was a permanent site plan condition, because it's been going on for so many years, one by one, that by the time it became, nobody noticed. So,
If I could interrupt you just real quick. So explain what you mean by power doors, just so everyone understands. What the
Okay,
situation is.
so power doors, anybody cares to hear this, these strike pads are not really made for, people put them on their condos and their apartment doors. If you really want to have a power door so that you get near the door, there's a sensor, opens, and you come in, hands-free. I keep saying this is the most efficient, has the lowest amount of upkeep, but somehow we are habituated to strike pads, and they break, and the springs give out, and they're intensive for upkeep. Where are we going to use one now? I have the partnerships for affordable housing. They're using the sensors. Old days, a squirrel could come by or dock somebody and it could open the door. But now you can narrow the beam, and they've had no trouble, because that was everybody's concern. Everybody walks by, that thing's going to open. It's not been their experience. So to anybody who will listen, when you invest the money, invest in hands-free. And so as soon as you approach, so it doesn't matter if you have a double stroller, if you've got things in your hands, no matter what, it just opens. It makes everybody's life better. And that's the thing about power doors. Now, the ADA says interior doors have to be no more than 5 pounds pull pressure. Now, you say, well, the ADA, and they'll say, well, I comply with the ADA. I'm done. Well, I've come back to the table in Arlington because I was there for 10 years, moved away to do something else, another project for a couple of years, and all the buildings that are going up, they're out of compliance with the internal doors. People have these beautiful full glass doors. They're gorgeous, but it's almost impossible to get them into a 5 pound pull pressure. Now, a lot of them can be fixed with the spring at the top and adjusted, but nobody's checking to make sure they're compliant. It's like, oh, there's a door, you've got the right handle, and they're forgetting about it. And so I'm back at the table to try and figure out how we move forward to really make sure we're in compliance. And it just seems to be that's not on people's radar. The same, new buildings are going up, and you've got reception desks, and you've got counters that you sell food or collect money for sandwiches, and they're not in compliance. 36 is the maximum height. And that's a thing that people just really aren't paying attention to. And then, one at a time, we've got to go back and say, you need to do something. And it's much easier for some of us who do this to just get people to build it right the first place. Now, that also is a code compliance issue. So we have to work with code enforcement to make sure it's not just fire code, but it's ADA as well. And there's always more work to do. Do you have any questions to this point?
Sure, I'll ask. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Shields. Go ahead, you can go first.
It might be the one you're about to ask.
Well, probably not, but I was going to talk about just sort of streetscape in general and crosswalks and things like that. Are there preferences in terms of, like, for example, there's some we do which look like they have a 90 on the corner. Basically, it flattens out
Right.
at a 90 in the corner. There's some where you have one on one side, a ramp on the other side.
Our
There's also
preference-
issues about button placement.
Our preference is to have separate for each one, because they tend to make them short, and then you wind up going in the street while somebody's able to make a right to go this way. So it's safer for those of us in wheelchairs for two in the direction that you need to go in. and not the sweeping one, because the sweeping one leaves you short. As it starts to come up, you still need to get there, so you're going this way to get that way. And it winds up having car, pedestrian, wheelchair conflict. It's a dangerous situation. The thing about when you're talking about actuators on the street, think about people who can't use their hands. Either they have crutches or they're quadriplegics. Their hands are full. The base of the stanchions tend to be so wide that we can't get close to the button because the cement bottom of it is out to here and the pole's here. Well, we can't get there to push the button. Some of them that exist are you can wave, and that's a good one. At Boston Common Mall, I worked on the access at the Boston Quarter, and they're all wave. You don't have to touch anything. All the door actuators are wave technology. I didn't get the no hands, but at least it's a wave and not a spring. Anyway, so the street, the big problem is we can't hit the actuators, and that's a safety issue.
And how about the ones that have the little sticks sticking out? Have you seen those? I think we've started to have those in the city. Don't we have at least one or two of those that have the little things sticking out off the telephone pole?
We do it at Cherry and Broad as an example, and it's that wide base. And base, we wanted the stanchion for the signal to be out of the way of the sidewalk, and it's far enough away that we needed an extender bar so that the button is close to the sidewalk. And that was an ADA requirement, but it still requires you to use your hands and press the.
And it's so as much as you can do that's hands-free. Wave technology exists for actuators.
How about the pressure? Like you mentioned, 5-pound pressure. Aren't there other lower pressure buttons that are better for people as well? Like 3 pounds or whatever is just 5. That's it basically. Pressure.
Well, the 5-pound pull pressure is for doors.
But how about the button
Buttons.
pressure? Like the button pressure you press on. There's
Actually, I haven't read anything. Have you? I haven't seen one.
Rosemary, I have a question. Continuing down the streetscape discussion. In terms of our compliance here in the city for sidewalk width, we have some areas specifically out in front of Vito's other telephone pole. We talk about it being an issue for folks with strollers, but I have a friend in a powered wheelchair that forces him to go into the street. So what are maybe it's just a question for city staff, what are our ADA requirements for sidewalk and kind of ingress egress into businesses? Does it really only apply for new development at this point?
No, its sidewalk compliance should have been in 1991 when ADA was adopted and the sidewalk standards. So we have a plan and we need to more proactively correct. That specific incident is just not wide enough. It doesn't even meet the minimum access width.
Okay.
But we need to get the pole moved, and that's an easement issue, and there is funding that council appropriated for that undertaking.
Do you have street furniture as part of your sidewalk plan?
Yes.
We run into trouble with that because the city owns the parking space, right? But the handicap space has to go somewhere, and it seems to be applied last. And we have a lot of conflict because you can't, especially if you have a lift, you can't open the lift to get out of your van because now you've got street furniture. I love street furniture, but somehow we haven't quite figured out how to get everybody talking together so that we get the handicap spot, particularly if it is a it's a higher multifamily dwelling that's a rental. The spot nearest the door to the leasing office is the spot that has to be a handicap accessible. And then to get that spot there, and the people on top, to be handling that, and then the person who decides where the street furniture goes aren't the same people. And and then bike racks. So it's really a coordination issue in terms of making this work, and that's where it's that human element where we struggle, I know, at Arlington. Also, do you have the parking meter, the bundles? You got rid of the parking meters? No meters. Well, they put in these boxes, and to pay is up here, you know? So they had to go back and order new ones. But today I found a new parking meter put in the sidewalk. There's the tree pit, now there's a parking meter, and then there's the sidewalk. Because, yeah, it's hard. I mean, who has a parking meter in the sidewalk instead of the curb? These are the things we struggle with.
Mr. Duncan, do you have some?
Thank you for coming tonight. Later on tonight, we're talking about scooters. So I have a feeling that you are going to be the world's authority on how we should make scooters and pedestrians and people who are on wheeled vehicles of other sorts get along. What's your advice?
Well, we are having the same meetings, and one thing that can't happen is the scooters propped up against the actuator poles. So not only is it hard enough to get to the button, now there's a scooter propped up against it, or in the curb cuts. I think there needs to be a lot of public service announcements. I think so that we make, not 1,000, commands of people using them, but 4 or 5 of the main ones for rules of the road. Whether we make them in the street, but some of them are 14, 15, 16 years old. We haven't gotten to the part where we have, we're still sharing our bike lanes with cars. I wouldn't want my 14 or 15-year-old doing that. So there's a place where they have to be on the sidewalk, but we need to manage the speed. I think it's just a way of figuring out how we all live together. There's a lot to like about them. Young people are driving less. None of my kids own a car. They're grown adults, and they love the scooter. They're 29 to 35 years of age. So it's carbon neutral. It's shared transit. There's a lot for us to like if we can figure out how to live with all of these new shared choices for transit. And the sidewalks are, the old sidewalks are only 5 feet or 3 feet wide. And I don't think we're going to get perfect. I think we're still struggling with wheelchairs on the sidewalks, and not, so I do encourage people not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, that somehow we need to figure out how to live symbiotically with these new things, because I do think they are an important part of where we're going in the future with transit. And one of the things we have is you get more than 2 or 3 blocks away from the metro stop, people start driving. That's where and to get people out of their car, especially younger people, if these scooters are one way that's going to help the next generation to utilize public transit when they live 3 blocks or more, where we've always struggled, I think, we need to be very careful as we move forward with these.
So let me ask you, how do you incorporate the changes above and beyond ADA that are appropriate to make? Everyone sort of views ADA, a lot of people, as kind of the be-all, end-all. And I think what you're saying is there's plenty we can do above and beyond ADA.
There's plenty. One of the things that I'm hoping to work on is universal design concepts for urban environments. And what is that? That means that when you build new multifamily businesses in particularly urban areas, that you have ground floor access. Everything's at grade for the main entrance. And I have rarely seen an instance in all of my projects where we weren't able to do that. There's one project in Courthouse that's on a hill like this. We were able to, if you do it at the beginning, you're able to get at grade, at ground floor, and that there shouldn't be a ramp for wheelchair users and steps. Now, you know, as it's been explained to me, there is a theory of thought in architectural communities that steps give gravitas. And that's why lots of courthouses and things, it's all steps. Okay, but I think in today's urban environment, universal design is not having separate entrances for wheels and one for able-bodied people. You just bring it down. It's also more cost-effective. You're not maintaining two separate entrances. You know, there's a cartoon that goes around every winter because people are, you know, scraping snow off the steps, and the person in the wheelchair is waiting to get up a ramp. He says, well, I'll get to you as soon as I get the snow off the steps. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. You've got one entrance. It's just more dignified. Everybody should move through space the same way. And if you're planning from the beginning, that is, those of us who believe in universal design believe that that's the most appropriate way to do new urban buildings.
But so there's not those design concepts yet, right? So how do we now?
You just, when you're at the table and they bring in a plan and they've got steps and they've got a ramp, you're like,
No, I got it on the steps, but how about all the other things? You know, in other words, like that's one element of universal design, but there's, I imagine, a whole lot more.
the other thing I work on is visitability. We did form-based code on on Columbia Pike. Is everybody familiar with form-based code? Okay. And Arlington is the only county that successfully was able to prevail and get visibility in their form-based code. No other place in the country was able to do that. And visibility is to say that you can come around the back, that's fine, but that there's one entrance in the back it can be, people can visit. There's a room down there, if it's townhouse, there's a room, there's usually a bathroom, and it's a way of, when you're building it, sometimes it's moving the water heater in the garage to someplace else so that you can bump that out and have a usable bathroom. We're not talking McDonald's ADA. We're talking 32-inch door that somebody can get in and close, right? And then that room, that's usually, there's a room on that first floor of the townhouse that people use as a office or whatever. There's a couple reasons that we really believe in this. One, because there's friends that we want to visit. But also, every family, if you have a kid, soccer injury, knee surgery, you know, there's times when people aren't going to be able to go to the stairs. This is what drives a lot of people after a certain age into rehab centers, because they go home and they only have steps. They cannot go home. And if they had a place that was visitable, they could, with somebody bringing them meals and stuff, they could live on that first floor for that week or two. They have a bathroom, they have a room, pull-out sofa, whatever, while they recuperate. People have gone to building townhouses with little pocket bathrooms and come down the steps, and it's been a long time since I've been in a townhouse, but I've been told, and I've seen the plans, you come up, you come in the living room, and then you'll have the dining room and the kitchen, but there's stairways down to the next level, and off the stairway, there's a little bathroom, a pocket bathroom. Well, you know, I talked with developers to not do that. Somehow bring that up to the first floor so that when grandma comes for Thanksgiving dinner, you don't have to worry about taking her down the stairs to that little pocket. I mean, or people who have surgery. So, it's working with our developers to make our new homes visitable.
And universal design. Is there any kind of manual right now? You say you're working on it. Is there anything?
No, we're not. There's definitely there's Atlanta. Sorry, I'm working on it in Arlington. But there's I'm not the designer or the proprietor of Universal Design. It's been out there a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say, there is great universal design concepts. I think what I'm liking hearing from Rosemary is taking that philosophy a little farther so that we all can live together and it's accessible, but also in the urban environment, because we're retrofitting and we have more dense. And so it's a different mindset. Universal design's been out there a long time. In fact, your building official, Doug Frazier, has been through those trainings, and he, of course, does ADA Title III whereas I'm more focused on Title II for public facilities and Title I for employment, so we make a team. But it is sort of changing your philosophy proactively and looking at it holistically and not just within the framework of the code.
But it seems to me like looking at it when you're actually in the design phase, when a developer comes to us and be able to say, we'd like you to do X, Y, and Z. That's what I'd like to know is what, was there a resource where we can say, look, we'd like you to do this, we'd like you to do that.
Well, you, as there are designs where I'm trying to hopefully go with Arlington County that we can't mandate, but we can let everybody know that our preference for anybody who's looking at coming forward with 4.1, our strong preference is to have everything at grade, so they know just going into it. Instead of after they've done their drawings and put some money in it, you're saying, yeah, no, we don't. Steps. So those are some of my work products that I'm hoping to get out.
And Rosemary did provide her language for the site plan conditions, so that's what's up on the display, just to give you one example.
Yeah, this
of
is
something.
Arlington's permanent site plan condition. So that's something right away. I just visited a friend in down the street, there's a new multifamily dwelling. They're condos. And there I was, couldn't get in. I was like, somebody come help me. So, and then you called.
Yeah. All right, are there other questions folks have? Listen, we greatly appreciate you coming out today. This is a conversation we want to continue to have. And
I'd be happy to keep the conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you so
very
much for coming out. It's been a real pleasure for us. All right. Okay, let's move on to our next item, which is related, and you're welcome to stay for it if you'd like, which is scooters. So I don't know if we want to get our folks in the audience from the various boards and commissions maybe to join us up on the table here. Would you guys like to come on up and sit with us and join our conversation about scooters? All right.
So we've got Carrie.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. And it is time now for our discussion about scooters. So I know this is a topic of great interest to a whole lot of folks and a whole lot of opinions and a whole lot of ideas. Remember as well that this will be a pilot program, a pilot project, so we can meet the deadline for the state. We don't have the state impose rules upon us, so but it is possible to change whatever we come up with. So, but anyway, thank you all for coming out. Mr. Shields, you want to set the table for this discussion?
Well, I think you did just in your comments a moment ago. The choice before the city council really is whether to have our own local policies govern the rollout of shared mobility devices in the city of Falls Church, or have them come anyway under the state's blanket rules that are applied statewide. And so Carrie Odanino is our staff lead on this project. She has been researching the experience nationwide as well as with our neighbors. And in your staff report are the recommended policies. What's also attached to the staff report is a policy statement and a draft memorandum of agreement that we would ultimately enter into with up to 2 firms for the pilot period. The pilot is intended to be for 1 year, and over that period we would study how it works here in the city and then ultimately adopt permanent policy with the input of boards and commissions. This we're recommending we learn from it before we take the permanent steps. So that's a quick introduction, and Ms. Odanino is going to give a fuller staff presentation on this. And let me just also start by thanking Carrie for your work on this. Carrie has a lot on her plate. She's handling all of her NVTA grants, and it's NVTA grant season. The Fairfax County Ring Road, the grant applications that we're putting forward for Park Avenue and for Shreve Road connectivity, amongst many other things. And so this is just one piece of what she's doing right now. But Carrie, thank you.
Thank you, Wyatt, and thank you, Mayor Tartar, members of City Council, as well as members of the CICT. So no formal council action is requested tonight. Staff is instead seeking final markup on the staff report, as well as the memorandum of agreement, program document, and permit application in advance of council action. And as Wyatt noted, if a locality does not implement an ordinance or pilot program by January 1st, 2020, shared mobility device companies can operate in that locality as authorized by the state legislation passed earlier this year. So the staff report provides the draft pilot program city staff has prepared that will enable the city to evaluate and tailor its policies on e-scooters and other shared mobility devices. So shared mobility devices include motorized skateboards, scooters, bicycles, or electric power-assisted bicycles. And these devices typically are shared among riders, operated by private companies, and are enabled by technology or apps. Shared mobility devices are also frequently dockless, meaning that they park in public spaces and lock to themselves in an app. Shared mobility devices are frequently used for social or entertainment trips, shopping or errands, and as a first mile, last mile solution by individuals traveling from rail transit, as well as other short trips. In terms of the pilot evaluation process moving forward, as part of that evaluation and any pilot extension or ordinance processes, city staff will consult with city council as well as boards and commissions for feedback on the shared use mobility devices demonstration project program and any proposed changes. In terms of changes since the last work session, staff has included definitions of a bicycle, electric power-assisted bicycle, and motorized skateboard or foot scooter to the staff report. So those devices do not include segways or mopeds. In terms of research, in a survey of e-scooter riders by researchers at North Carolina State University, 7% of users reported that they would not have taken the trip otherwise. 49% would have biked or walked, 34% would have used personal automobile or rideshare service, and 11% would have taken a public bus. The same study showed that dockless e-scooters consistently result in higher life cycle global warming impacts relative to most modes except for the personal automobile. Per report published by the Portland, Oregon Bureau of Transportation, e-scooter users rode on the sidewalk more on less comfortable streets with fewer bike facilities, and on roads with higher posted speed limits. For the first 2 months of the City of Fairfax shared use mobility devices demonstration project, the average length of a trip was about a mile, with 80% of trips less than 2 miles. Also, for the beginning of the City of Fairfax pilot, the average trip duration was 15 minutes, with 75% of trips less than 20 minutes. Looking at traffic laws, motorized skateboards, scooters, bicycles, or electric power-assisted bicycles have all of the rights and duties applicable to the driver of a vehicle per state code. Policy guidance, expanding shared mobility devices into the city is generally supported by adopted city policies, including the Mobility for All Modes chapter of the city's Transportation Master Plan, which establishes a vision for expanded transportation mode choice and stronger connections to the regional transportation system. So the General Assembly passed legislation effective July 1st, 2019, that granted localities the ability to regulate the use of motorized skateboards or scooters, bicycles, or electric power-assisted bicycles for hire. Localities are not granted the power to ban these devices, but may regulate them. If a locality does not implement an ordinance or pilot program by January 1st, 2020, shared mobility device companies can operate in that locality as authorized by the legislation, and devices as addressed in state legislation are less than 100 pounds, have a max speed of 20 miles per hour, are permitted to ride on sidewalks unless prohibited by local ordinance, have both headlight and taillight, and if less than 14 years old, riders need parental supervision. Also per city code, section 26109, riders 14 years of age or younger are required to wear a protective helmet. Looking at regional context, shared mobility devices have been operating in other jurisdictions in the region under various pilot programs, as shown on page 8 of the staff report. Arlington County and City of Alexandria programs have been operating for over a year. Arlington County was seeing around 435 devices from a winter data poll, and June was seeing 806 devices. The City of Alexandria is seeing around 650 to 700 motorized scooters, and the City of Fairfax is seeing around 225 to 250 motorized scooters in terms of recent reported data. In terms of permit fees, Arlington County has an $8,000 one-time upfront permit fee per company per device type. With their extension, they've added a $5,000 fee, while the City of Alexandria and the City of Fairfax have a $5,000 fee. The City of Fairfax also charges a right-of-way use fee of 5 cents per trip. Looking at e-scooters per 1,000 people, Arlington County was seeing 1.85 e-scooters per 1,000 people in the winter and 3.43 per their June data. City of Alexandria is seeing around 4 e-scooters per 1,000 people, and City of Fairfax around 9 or over 9 per 1,000 people. If the City of Falls Church were to allow 100 scooters, the city would be at just over 7 e-scooters per 1,000 people, and at 200 scooters would have about over 14 e-scooters per 1,000 people. In terms of speed, Arlington County is recommending 15 miles per hour on the street, and their staff, their staff report, their most recent staff report from last week, that they'll be seeing in November. They're recommending that the scooters be allowed on the sidewalk at 6 miles per hour. The City of Alexandria is recommending 15 miles per hour on the street and 6 miles per hour on sidewalks. And let's see. So, in terms of the proposed pilot program, in terms of locations where devices are permitted to operate, staff is recommending that the shared mobility device users in the City of Falls Church be encouraged to ride on the street, except for Route 29, Route 7, and be allowed on the sidewalk. In terms of parking locations for the devices, shared use mobility devices must be parked in a manner that doesn't impede pedestrian traffic or other uses as noted in the MOA. Also, in terms of parking, city staff will identify designated parking locations for shared use mobility devices. Helmets, there is no current enabling legislation to require helmets for electric scooters. The enabling legislation for helmets only applies to riders of bicycles and electric bicycles who are 14 years of age or younger. Some operators provide messages regarding helmets and apps on websites and on devices, and there are operators who also partner with helmet companies to provide discounted helmets. In terms of speed, staff is recommending max speed of 20 miles per hour on a motorized bicycle and 15 miles per hour on a motorized scooter or skateboard in street, and 6 miles per hour on the sidewalk. In terms of safety features, staff is recommending that a speedometer be required on each device. In terms of minimum age, staff is recommending 16 years old as the minimum, though many apps have a minimum age of 18 years old. tandem riding, recommending that that be prohibited with a limit of 1 rider at a time per device. In terms of number of companies in the pilot, staff is recommending a limit of 2 operators and a fleet of 50 to 100 scooters per operator. And this is per discussions with the operator where they expressed interest in those numbers in terms of what they would want to deploy. Looking at staff time, the city of Fairfax reported that about roughly a third of an FTE in staff time would be required. And in terms of city staff, that would be sort of a shared responsibility. I don't think anyone sort of has it in their workload to take that on by themselves. With regard to fees, city staff is recommending an $8,000 upfront permit fee and a per trip fee of 25 cents per trip. And then in terms of applying for a permit to the demonstration project, the process will include a memorandum of agreement, a business license, and applicable business taxes, permit application, a permit fee to offset city's oversight costs, and a per trip fee for use of the city right-of-way. In terms of timing, pilot program set to be open in December to operator applications, and then in terms of attachments, a draft of the permit application MOA and program document are attached. So if there are comments,
I imagine there probably are. Why don't we start with our friends from our boards and commissions? Do you guys want to kick it off with any comments or questions from what you've just heard?
Carrie, I did send some closer. I did send some questions. I hope Jeff forwarded them to you. Just to not belabor it, but given the fact that Alexandria is recommending 6 miles per hour on the sidewalks, I think you just said Arlington 6. Right. Would we be considering a 6 mile per hour limit on sidewalks too? Okay. Is there any way that the speed can be governed, or we're just depending on the operator to keep the speed down?
So, Singapore is the only country that has the level of GPS accuracy, as I understand it, like down to the centimeter to like geofence the sidewalks. So it's basically it's not precise enough for the governors to use just for the width that the sidewalks are, is my understanding.
So we'll be requesting 6 miles per hour, but it's up to the operator to assure that?
Well, in terms of approach, I think requiring the speedometer to be on the device so that users can see how fast they're going, and then having in the app, messaging what the speed is on the sidewalk.
Okay. Another question. The city's fee structure appears to be higher than any of the neighboring jurisdictions that are quoted. Do we have any concern that that's going to discourage qualified vendors?
We are planning to, and some operators I know have already sort of looked at it and didn't mention that as a concern, but we will check in and make sure.
I know that Alexandria is working with vendors to do some geofencing to prevent operation and leaving scooters in certain areas like the waterfront and Market Square. Is that something we're considering?
Yeah, so my understanding is it is easier to geofence sort of larger areas and like larger rectangular or square areas, so.
What that would mean is you couldn't bring a scooter into that area or leave one.
You're talking about my yard? Yeah.
Well, that's just kind of a subsequent question. like to recommend that we place a requirement on the vendors to provide and advertise their procedures for the public to directly report to the vendor improperly parked or damaged devices.
Okay.
I don't think that's suggested here in the report. And we could likewise put that in the permit application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, other questions, comments? Anyone? Sure. Well, let's stick with the boards and commissions first.
Carrie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
So I guess I just have a question about parking in the neighborhoods. You say that you're going to be providing parking adjacent to Capitol Bike Share stations, which are all pretty close to Route 7 or 29, and then other locations as appropriate. So what would those other locations look like? What would the density be? Where would they be placed in the neighborhoods? Is that what you're thinking, or within like more of the business areas? I imagine people are going to be riding these to their homes, so that's why I'm wondering where they will be parked when they get there.
Yeah, so if there, we will look at sort of if there are areas in the neighborhoods where that sort of corral could be sited. But if people want to park them in their own yards, that sort of staff didn't view that as.
Yeah, I guess my concern is more that people might park them on like a narrow residential sidewalk and impede
Yeah.
people from walking. So in the neighborhoods, where will we, what is our recommendation for where people should park the devices? If it's not there in their own yard?
In the street or in their own yard, not on the sidewalk.
And will that be made clear in the instructions to the users when they park them in the residential areas? They should not be parked on the sidewalks?
Yeah. Yeah, so and sort of when you open some of the apps in other locations, it says do not park these on sidewalks. Yeah.
For all the research too, I thought that was really,
Boards and commissions before we move to council comments? Sure.
First, Carrie, thank you for all your hard work on this. I mean, this was a pretty good undertaking. Couple questions is, a lot of these kind of rules need to be enforced, and I'm assuming that the police are going to have to be involved. Have you gotten any feedback from them regarding some of these rules? And then separate question of why limit to just 2 companies? I know we don't want to make it the Wild Wild West and have like a dozen, but I was wondering why just 2.
Yeah, so I'll do your second question first, I guess. To make it worth it for them to like, I guess, manage their operations, some of the operators expressed that like dropping more scooters was of interest, like 50 to 100, and so, and then looking at the per capita, like, or the number of scooters per 1,000 people, staff felt that sort of 200 should be the max, if that sort of 100 initial, if there were enough trips proven to allow sort of an incremental increase. So starting at 50 per operator, and then the increase if there are enough rides to 100 at the maximum. And so, yeah, so I think in order to have the operators be interested in dropping scooters, I guess, so that since they wouldn't want to drop just like 20 or I don't know, 5 or whatever. And then to your second question, I think in terms of issues with just in general with the e-scooters.
One, I guess, speed, helmet rules. We also have age requirement rules where we have asked the company to enforce this, especially if the age is 16 it's kind of an odd age. It's not like it's 18 or 21 or, so how that enforcement would just kind of be followed through with, and whether a lot of this, it seems like will be falling onto the police to enforce this. And I mean, that's another thing we're adding to their plate.
So in terms of the age, a lot of the companies actually have a minimum age of 18. I don't think all of them do, but so that's messaged like in their app and sometimes on the device itself. And then I guess they also have the ability to do a fraud check, where if they have, there's the same card used on multiple phones, where sort of one, I guess, parents allowing their kids to use their card, is my understanding, something that they do. And then in terms of parking, I think the first approach that would be used is to have the company deal with the issue. We're requiring device decals with their contact information and a 24-hour phone line where they can be contacted. I think, and then also in terms of parking, that police would actually be the last sort of that would be more easily dealt with by someone in DPW probably, so that they don't, because if the police come to the scene, they have to file a report, and so that's a little bit more complicated. And then in terms of, I think the police is just gonna monitor the most egregious of offenses, not sort of the scooter's going, I guess 8 miles per hour on the sidewalk. That's probably, I think they have more other business.
All right, other comments? Mr. Pelton?
Thank you for all of the background. I think the brief discussion we've had at the EDA was very supportive, and others I've talked to in the business community are very supportive. In terms of the timing of the pilot and when it launches, is the goal to have the pilot enacted and contracted and actually on the scooters on the streets before January 1st, or do we just have to have it enacted the legislation before that?
I'm not clear on that.
I think the pilot has to be available to them by January 1, so the pilot would set the policy. They don't have to be in operation by January.
And the only reason I ask is I think that a key feature of a successful rollout is the designated parking locations or corrals, particularly in the business districts. And that's obviously going to require some staff time and work to find and paint and communicate about those.
Yeah, the operators have said that they don't plan to deploy until spring. The ones that we've spoken with, that they probably wouldn't drop in the winter. So.
All right, are there other comments or questions from our boards and commissions before we move on to council comments? All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse, you want to start it off?
Gary, thanks. Again, this is very thorough. Appreciate it. And you guys answered some of the questions that I had. Looking at the number of scooters, kind of per capita ratios. So we've got, it's like limit of 2 companies for the pilot program. Could be a total of up to 100 each, depending on the type of device that they deploy. So we're looking at 200, which puts us at like 14 per, I think, per 1,000, right? Which is much greater than the survey for City of Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington.
Right.
Do we not anticipate that, we'll reach close to that maximum in this pilot. Concern we're being on the high end that we may end up even with only 2 operators, more scooters than we may like.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern. And we could bring that number down or just do 1 operator.
I'm not really concerned about limiting the number of operators necessarily. It's more of the maximum, just looking at the ratios. And again, I'm just going based on numbers. I don't know if there's a direct correlation between additional problems and the scooter per 1,000. But that would be something that we may want to consider. How many if it is 200 total, how many trips a month do we expect? Do we have any kind of estimate? I was looking through here to try to figure out how many trips a month we might expect, and then leads me to a follow-up question about what it means in terms of expected revenue for the city. So for 25 cents per ride, $8,000 per permit per user, do we have any idea as to what this may generate for the city?
I know that City of Fairfax, they saw, I believe, 59, or was it? I believe it was 5,900 trips, but that was for August, and I know that they're a lot lower in the winter.
5,900 in the month of August?
Right.
Okay.
And so, and I think they have 200 to 225 to 250 devices. So we probably, I mean, we would be seeing less than that.
So if we're looking at a third of an FTE, if you look at kind of base plus, I mean, we modeled this to cover that cost. It seems like that would be the case if I just do quick math in my head based on
Right.
numbers. The 25 cent per trip, is that a cost that is passed directly on to the consumer when they unlock and go? Or is it to some extent kind of lost in the wash of the total cost of doing business in the city of Falls Church? Meaning if I unlock in the city for the same mile or minute compared to another jurisdiction, is that 25 cent tacked on as opposed to the 5 cents that is modeled in some of the other jurisdictions? Do we know that?
We don't know that yet.
I mean, I'm just curious, not to say that it changes my mind about any of this, because again, this seems to be very thorough. But for me, it's kind of cost benefit. One, I think it's great to have additional modes of transportation, so I'm certainly supportive of that, but I want to make sure it's the right number, and then I want to make sure that we're generating enough revenue to make it worth it. And if there are ways for us to, if we find ourselves in a situation where we're actually able to generate more on the per trip, if it doesn't discourage folks from unlocking and renting in Falls Church, because there's a distinct difference in the cost when they unlock and they can tell on their phone. The elasticity of that, I'd just be interested to know how much we could use that to get as much as possible out of it without impacting the demand.
Yeah, we can ask that.
That's all I've got for right now. Thank you.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Carrie. I will echo everyone's comments. I was really impressed with how detailed the staff report was. I think last time we talked, I wanted to make sure that we're getting learnings, given that scooters can be controversial. So I really appreciated how you got learnings from like Portland and North Carolina and Austin. So I think that just shows that we're really considering the breadth of this. A lot of people already answered a lot of my questions, but overall, I wanted to make sure that we had a pilot program with sensible regulations that would address what we knew were the top concerns based on learnings, and I think you've done that. I actually did read Arlington's latest report that I just sent you. So over the weekend, they actually just came up with a 150-page staff report that I quickly skimmed in the past half hour. They are recommending that on their November 16th meeting, they adopt these changes. And so one of their changes that they're doing is sidewalks have been banned up until now. So during their 1-year pilot so far, they have been saying no sidewalk riding, but actually going forward, they're recommending that both sidewalk and street usage be allowed, with the provision that if there's a protected or dedicated bike lane available, then you shouldn't use sidewalks, because that is what users prefer. They prefer just having a bike lane because it's much safer for them and it's easier for pedestrians too. So I thought we should take that into account. I don't know how many dedicated bike lanes we have other than Hillwood, South Maple, and maybe another place, but Roosevelt. So maybe those are the places we could say no sidewalk riding, no street riding, you should use the bike lane. And clearly I think the learning there is, I think we just need to have more of those multi-use protected bike lanes. I think as we see how ridership works on those 3 streets, that'll probably encourage us to think about that more as something that we need to add into our transportation system. So that's one thing I want to make sure we call out. The second is I want to make sure that the things that we're implementing is not going to be dramatically out of sync with other jurisdictions. So while we may be special in Falls Church, at the end of the day, we are 2 square miles, and these scooters are going to travel outside our boundaries. And so I want to make sure the speed limits, which I think they are now, so if the 15 miles per hour on street, 6 miles per hour on sidewalk is what we'll also implement. I think that's where Arlington is right now and where they're going to head. Do we have any sense of where Fairfax County is going to be, since they're also going to start a pilot?
I believe when I last checked, they were sort of wavering between 15 and 10. And I believe when I last checked, they were 10, but I don't know if they've changed that.
Okay. So something for us to keep an eye on, because again, I think our scooters are just going to go, especially when they get to the metro stations, which is where I think Arlington is seeing their highest utilization. I think they see that kind of that 1 mile trip, especially to and from transit, is where it's most popular. So that's clearly going to be in Fairfax County and Arlington. So we just need to be careful of, what the rules are and how they might change once you cross over the boundaries. I had the same question around the fee structures. So 5x what other people charge seems a little high to me, but if it's not going to discourage usage, we can certainly test that and see how that changes after the pilot. I did see in the staff report that e-bikes are treated pretty differently. I don't know how many of those we have, but I was pretty concerned that e-bikes, because they're actually allowed to go 20 miles per hour and then 6 miles an hour on sidewalks, are actually allowed on sidewalks. And I think I read in the staff report that we actually don't have enabling legislation that allows us to ban them on sidewalks. Because I think we normally allow regular bikes to be on sidewalks. So it seems like e-bikes being on sidewalks seems even more dangerous for pedestrians. Is that true? E-bikes are actually allowed on the sidewalks?
I believe we allow regular bikes on sidewalks. Yeah.
Courtesy thing that you're not supposed to ride them.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that's something we should consider for the legislative program, but I just have concerns with e-bikes being on sidewalks. But if that's something that they can give localities the power to regulate, I'd like that. More tactically, I have some concerns about parking. This is a place where I do think we need to be pretty prescriptive. So in the commercial areas, I think it makes sense to say, hey, park them next to Capital Bike Share, the designated corrals. I share Andrea's concerns about in the residential areas, we probably need to tell people where to park. I'm not sure the street is the right place. Have we given thought to whether we should tell people to lean them up against poles that don't impede pedestrian traffic? Because we've got a lot of stop signs and parking signs and street name signs. Like, is that a good place where they can be upright and out of the way? Anyway, we just need to give more thought to that, because I think seeing the feedback from the other pilots, parking is going to be one of the major sources of complaints we're going to get, so we should anticipate that. And then 2 final thoughts. I really think the success of this pilot is really going to hinge on really, really good communication and proactive communication. So 1, around setting expectations with the community that this is a pilot. There will be literal bumps in the road, but this is how we have to test it and learn from it. And so I think lowering the bar that this is not going to be perfect is important. And then 2nd, doing lots of proactive communication on what good rules of the road are, how to be a good, courteous rider, let's not ruin it for everybody. I think there's some infographics that's been shared from DC and Arlington that if we can plagiarize, I'm supportive of that. And then when I met with the city of Fairfax, who had implemented this over their summer, one of their big learnings for us was actually recommending a designated email box or phone number. So while they also put the onus back on the operator, at the end of the day, they found that, frankly, their city council members got like 50 emails an hour sometimes when it first rolled out. And they really said having a designated mailbox that at least collect all of them was really good.
Is that Phil Duncan's mailbox? Is that our designated mail?
Yes. So if we can avoid that, even if we tell people that it's going to be the responsibility to operate or manage it, frankly, they're going to come to the city. So let's just get ahead of that, set something up so we tell them, like, hey, if you have a concern, email, scooters@fallschurchva.gov or call this number, and then they're not even calling you at all at once, too. Because I am concerned about staff time, and I want to make this pilot rollout easier than not. And then helmets. I know we don't have legislation to require people below the age of 14, but again, in our communication, let's at least strongly encourage, because I think it's just a good best practice even for bicycles. So, but thank you for all the work on this, and I look forward to seeing this in action.
All right, Dave.
Thank you very much. I want to list three major concerns. The first is a safety concern. I think this notion of allowing vehicles as we are now on the sidewalks is basically moving pedestrians down the food chain. The notion that they could be on the sidewalks at any speed for me is appalling, and partly because I'm very familiar with all of this. I work in downtown DC each day, and so I know how people abide by the rules of the road, namely they don't. So I'm pretty concerned about that. I think we've encouraged walking, and yet we're now going to allow all kinds of vehicles at relatively high speed to intrude on the very sidewalks that we claim we want and encourage pedestrian activity. Second point I have is fees. I've tried to run a rough calculation. It seems to me the fees come nowhere near the direct cost to the city, assuming a third FTE. And why should I allow a whole new category of vehicles on the street that we're going to have to police and administer at a loss to the city? It seems to me subsidizing that kind of thing is not within the public interest, considering all of our other obligations. The third issue is insurance. I appreciate that we're requiring it. However, is it clear that the insurance that's being required will insure the renter as well as the company, and that the company can't shift the liability to the renter? If that's a possibility, then we're going to have people hitting pedestrians, as will inevitably happen the way this is set up now, and the company will dodge liability and try to put it on the renter. Well, you didn't do this, you actually did the hitting. And the renter then, at that case, I don't know where they go. Do they go against their auto policy? Do they go against their homeowner's policy? Is it excluded in both? So if we're going to go this way and we're going to endanger the public, as I believe we are with this in its current form, then we shouldn't. But in addition, the insurance ought to be very clear that it's insurance on the activities of the renter as well as the activities of the company that's providing the vehicles. So those are a couple of the major concerns that I have. Thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor Conley, do you have any comments?
I'll echo everyone's thanks for this report. You were very thorough, and it was easy to read and understand, so thank you for that. I just have two questions left after listening to everybody else's. One is, in Section A of the proposed demonstration project agreement, I'm wondering if we want to add a sixth thing, which is that the companies that we allow in should also be working in our neighboring jurisdictions? Or will the market take care of that on its own? It doesn't make, if it's Jump and Jump isn't operating in Arlington, then people are just stuck here.
There is one company that's expressed interest that's currently only operating in Jersey City. But I think everyone else, all the other operators are also nearby.
It just might make sense, like, that we don't need to be the foothold of a new company, but one that is operating nearby. And then my other question is just on the fee structure. Is there a way, and have any of these other jurisdictions done this, to charge a fee or a fine to people that dispose of the scooters inappropriately? So if someone leaves it on someone else's front lawn, can the company impose a fine on that person that then comes back to the city?
Yeah, we spoke to an operator that was sort of testing that out in, I believe, Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
So they can do that.
One thing that at the Virginia Municipal League, there was an attorney who's been ruling consulting with local governments, and we asked that question because that would be such a better way to enforce things. And she did indicate problems with that, where the customers were saying, well, someone else moved it, or I left it in the right place, and so the companies are having a hard time collecting those fees. So I think the technology is there, but the law and the legality of it, I think, is still being worked through.
So can you just keep an eye on that as the law evolves? And if it does become possible for us to do that, that might be a good way to not only regulate behavior, but collect fees on that end. Thanks.
Mr. Duncan?
So that's a good question. Since we're on that, let's just, so the lines 346 to 352 speak to that, right? So users can be required to take a picture of the location where they parked a device in order for the ride to end. That would seem to solve the problem. I do remember hearing that down in Roanoke at the VML, but multiple operators noted that operators have the ability to pass on fines. Anyway, it seems like there might be a mechanism to do what the Vice Mayor is suggesting. I just want to say that I hope that we will have the smoothest and most successful rollout of scooters in the history of the Western world, and I'm sincere about that because I think these devices offer great potential to solve the last mile, first mile problem that we've always had here, where the metro stations are just a little too far away for a lot of folks to walk comfortably. So thank you, Ms. Odnino, for letting us know what it is that we need to try to avoid. That's to say the things between the lines 87 to 94, where the Arlington report identified the problem: sidewalk riding, broken devices, stolen, vandalized devices, et cetera, et cetera. If I could just flip through the notes that I've made and cover the things that have not been brought up by somebody else. It is kind of in the vein of problems, horrifying on lines 113 through 118 that a full 17% of users parked these devices to impede ADA access, to completely block pedestrian movement, to partially block pedestrian movement, or to park within a bus stop. Anyway, we have a lot of potential to improve human behavior when we roll these things out, and as was mentioned by Ms. Hardy, the communications is an important part of that. A question that I had at line 160, 159 through 163, where one of the problems that was identified was listening to music or a podcast while scootering. Then this is a question to the city attorney. I mean, are we allowed to ban the listening of music or wearing of headphones while traveling on a scooter? I mean, that seems inexcusable. I mean, I come from Tennessee, where they're not known for an interventionist government, and yet they've banned all use of cell phones in cars. Virginia has not chosen to do that, but I would at least like us here in Falls Church to set the example that we're not going to tolerate people plugged into their listening devices while they're scootering along on the sidewalks. It's already talked about helmets, so I won't need to go into that. I just truly hope that people will wear helmets. I would actually, there was some talk down in Roanoke at the VML about portable, collapsible helmets. Sean actually, I think, maybe pointed that out to me. There's some sort of device that can fit into your briefcase, and is there something we can do to encourage that? Mandate it? Probably not. Encourage it? Carrie?
Yeah, so they're it's like a cardboard helmet, but it's rated sort of the same safety rating.
Okay, well, I'm for that. So let's see if we can get those. I mean, when I was in Roanoke, the Lime guy, they're giving test rides and giving away helmets, and I wouldn't take a ride because I didn't want to break my neck this close to the election. But he said, you can have a helmet, and I said, okay, I'll try that out and see how that works. So after the election, whatever happens, I hope to be able to take a test ride on one of them and wear a helmet. And everybody in their right mind needs to wear a helmet. Sean always wears a helmet when I see him around town on his scooter. So the sidewalks thing, I'm kind of prone to agree with Mr. Snyder on that. I'm disappointed to hear, actually, that Arlington is allowing riding on sidewalks. And I mean, to me, one of the great potentials of this technology is that it is going to change the nature of how we behave on our streets. It's an extra step. We got bikes now we're going to have scooters, and people in cars are going to have to sort of wake up and realize they're not the only folks on the road. But people who are on sidewalks, they are called sidewalks. Walks, you know, they're not side rides or side whatevers. I would love to hear a more full discussion and get some community input on whether we want to have anything on sidewalks except pedestrians and people obviously who have mobility issues. And I don't know, I'd like to know what other folks think about that, I guess. So the recommendation that is contained on line 321 to 24, I would not be inclined to support that. I know Mr. Z is just itching to get into his views, so I'll try to zip through here. So we are going to corral, right? I mean, one thing they said down in Roanoke was, and what I've heard Andy and Brian say, is that, you know, the glory of these things is you can just take them into your neighborhood and dump them at the foot of your driveway, and it's better than bike share because of that. You don't have to go find a corral. You know, free range is the preferred method. So, I mean, if we're going to allow these things in residential neighborhoods, I would be inclined to, that's where I would be inclined to be a little more liberal so that we can get people to use them. It's not a big plus for me if I have to walk up from my house to Founders Row to get my corralled scooter to ride to West Falls Church. If I can take my scooter from my driveway down West Street and go straight to West Falls Church, then I'm more likely to use it and less likely to drive my car. The staff numbers, well, police, I love this line, 374. The police response would not be expected to be proactive. So I'm not sure what the opposite of proactive is, but if it's inactive, I think that's probably what we're going to get. I mean, just realistically, our police are pretty well filled up, you know, and unless we hire extra staff or put some of them on scooters, there's not going to be any real enforcement of the difference between 6 miles an hour and 15 miles an hour. And goodness gracious, DPW staff going around town to pick these things up. You know, we're having a hard time getting the traffic light fixed up at Broad and West. And to add more work to DPW like this, more to the point would be what Ms. Hardy or somebody said, which is just have a really big phone number taped onto these things that says, call this number if you're not happy about this scooter. And that number goes to your bunker run by the company that deploys some wrangler to come take care of this. Because I can't imagine that our staff's going to have time to do anything in this area. I share the views about the corral areas not taking up parking spaces. It is mobility for all modes, and all does still include cars. And while we are moving, you know, towards the better future, particularly given the efforts that we've made to expand downtown parking, I would hate to see us give any of that up. And I don't think it's necessary because, unlike bike share, these scooters should not have to take up as much space. Adult supervision is required if you're riding under 16. Good luck to that. And again, the police are not going to enforce that. And the staff time. So we're not contemplating adding an FTE to do this work. We're just going to filter it into the existing workload. Is that where this recommendation falls as it concerns the budget? You're not asking for a new FTE line to manage this.
We may be. But you did note that Carrie was not jumping to be volunteering to be the...
I did notice that, and that informs my earlier remarks. I think that's... Oh, business license. In the grid on page 15, companies must have a business license. Does that mean they're going to pay a BPOL? Is that in addition to the fee that they're already paying, the permit fee? It's just a question about...
Yes, and so I believe they would be...
And how is the BPOL calibrated? I mean, for a big company like...
It would be under the anticipated... So when you first get your application, be under the anticipated revenue and I think it would be charged under the business service provider.
Anticipated revenue in your in our jurisdiction.
jurisdiction. And
Obviously,
then
if we're
there's a
collecting
true-up at the
off
end
of
of the
Lime's revenue nationally, we're a fat city here, but we're not doing that. It's just gonna be locally.
That's right,
And we-
just local.
And so the first year, we really wouldn't have any idea what
Yeah,
the
they
number
would make
be.
a projection, and then there'd be a true-up, and then every year after that, it's the prior year's.
So it's the usual beep hole. So there's a little bit of administrative work there on the Commissioner of the Revenue's office that adds into your FTEs. Okay, well, like I say, I think, I thought when I saw these things in Roanoke, it's the first time I'd really been up close to them, I thought these are cool. You know, the woman doing the test drives was zipping by at 14 miles an hour, and I tell you, 14 mile an hour is pretty fast if you're walking. So I think people are going to love them because they're going to get you from Metro to downtown in a jiffy. But it would be nice to try to avoid some of the little shops of horrors that you've listed there at the beginning that other jurisdictions have encountered. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. I was surprised that there was so much interest at VML about e-scooters, and was even more surprised that there were all these elected officials wearing sandals and free helmets trying to get on the scooters. And the handlers said, you know, if you go faster, you're more stable. So these people with free helmets, there's something intuitively, I think, wrong about getting a free helmet and wearing sandals and driving fast. Anyway, you know, I'm not trying to
No,
be...
I was not wearing sandals. I was wearing dress shoes. So I'm not in the category that Nancy is.
Did he have socks? Did they have
Nor did I
socks
see-
on with those sandals?
I did not see Mr. Lickenhouse either wearing sandals.
And just continuing along that same line, just the other day I was walking my dog on the bike path, and there came this sound of a very ancient MC Hammer, and it was coming my way, and I was wondering who's playing MC Hammer in the middle of, and it's coming from an AirPod worn by a young man on a scooter on the bike path. It's probably a private scooter because it was going, well, more than 50 miles an hour. And I was running at that point, so, you know, faster than me anyway. There are two substantive things I want to share. And the first one is, it's been almost a whole entire page in various other places about the process for ensuring that protocol and process would be followed. And I think I would be more comfortable if somewhere here that we had a process diagram produced that we could use to track progress along these along this protocol that's laid out here. And the first line of responsibility would be obviously the rider. Beyond that, call the company, let's see how long it takes, how many times that happens, and you can only do that if you have a process diagram like a systems engineer would put together with, you know, do this, do that. How long does it take, then do that. And I would urge all of us that have anything to do with this to use that during the pilot program period, because that's the only way we're going to find out where the rough spots are, as opposed to people coming in with anecdotes. I probably don't have that problem. I've got a big 4x4 with truck with big tires. Someone parks in front of my house. It'll be lime wedges. The other one I would comment I would put out is that we probably need to see if we can set up a separate P&L for this, for the city, for equipment and personnel, and so that goes to the question, the comment of, you know, do we need more staff, less staff, how much time is spent, how much equipment is used, and it goes back to process diagram as well, because we can now figure out that if the company doesn't pick up their scooter within X number of hours or days, that then Public Works gets dispatched, and you can figure all that out within the year that we have to try to figure this out. That's kind of it. I've got more, but I think that's, you know, all that will be worked out. I think that scooters are like migratory wildlife. They're coming, and some of them will roost here. Thank you so much.
All right, it looks like most of what I've had intended to say or ask about has been discussed already. A couple questions for you, though. So what would the criteria be for selecting the two vendors? We'd issue an RFP, and what would we base the selection on?
So it's looking at the attachments to the permit application and sort of the response to those, and then developing a scoring criteria for each of those categories and scoring the applicants. Yeah, based on what they would be required to submit.
So I'm not sure I totally follow you. Like, let's say there's 10 vendors operating in the area. How do we select among the 10?
The quality of the plans that they submit.
Plans for?
Community engagement, maintenance, service area and deployment, safety and operations.
Okay. In terms of the contracts we let with these folks, do other places charge them, like back charge them, for example, for picking up scooters and things like that? So, for example, let's say they're not responsive. Presumably you can terminate the contract, but is there a way to, quote, back charge them? Hey, we're going to charge you $50 for every scooter that's not picked up in 8 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah, I believe someone else had that, and we, staff did propose that as well in, I believe the MOA. I think it was $50 a day, or no, so $50 as an initial charge and then 10 per day.
We also have the process of the cash bond, do we not carry, where they will post with the city a $5,000 bond, which the city may use to pay costs relating to the removing and storing devices that do not comply with the permit requirements. And I think what's envisioned is once you get down to, let's say there's $1,000 left, you send them a letter saying you need to recharge your account. And if they choose not to recharge their account, then they could terminate their agreement with the city. That would be a way for the city to make sure that it is being compensated for direct costs.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me on a lot of these things, we're going to be kind of the tail, not the dog. Arlington, Fairfax, other communities are going to be much bigger. And so I think we do need to get our rules and regulations in line with our neighbors, so we can't be too dramatically different. I think Ms. Hardy maybe mentioned that earlier. But I think it is important when you're a small community. We don't want to, if we intend to have this, we need to make the rules, I think, fairly similar so people want to enter our market. So that's the thought I have. I'm trying to think of what else I have. I think that's it. Did I see something about having an office within 10 miles of here or something like that? So how does that work? I mean, do people have those offices within 10 miles of Little Falls Church?
Yeah, so my understanding is that they do. Let's see.
Yeah.
So where that is on page 5.
That is something that came up at VML. Somebody said, make sure that they've got a warehouse that's fairly close by. So, they respond from there. They're going to hire a wrangler who lives here to do the work probably, but, unless that person's going to store them all in his or her garage.
Mr. Mayor, ask a procedural question, Carrie. So this pilot program, so if we have issues around cost to operate, if we have issues around the permitted fee, just the general revenue we're getting, whatever it is, pilot program ends, do we have the ability to go back and revise our program significantly from where it was from a pilot perspective and then let's say we have 2 operators at that time, do they have to fall in line with the new program? Can they pull out? What happens after that pilot if we decide to make major revisions to what we've set out here?
So the term of the pilot is 12 months. So my understanding is we could set up a new pilot or put an ordinance in place with new regulations.
One question I think we'd probably need the city attorney's weigh in on is if our rules were constructed in such a way that it was really impossible to operate in the city, would that be in violation of state law? And there's probably some gray area there, but I think the city attorney would need to probably respond to that type of a question also.
I would just be interested in making sure that if we have language where we can materially change based on findings, that we have the ability to do so and we don't find ourselves locked into extending a pilot
Yes,
program with.
We certainly can change it.
Okay, good.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks. I'd make one other comment. Well, we may have the theoretical ability to do that. Once these things are out there and are being used, it'll be extremely difficult to go back and tighten things up. So it's critically important, in my view, that we get this right up front. And I appreciate all the work, but I continue to believe that there are safety issues, there are fees issues, and there are insurance issues that I hope can be addressed, and ask that they be addressed before we're called upon to act on this.
All right, are there other comments, either from boards or commissions or?
Could I ask a question? So we do have the draft here. We've taken comments. Is it the staff request is then to bring this for council consideration at your regular meeting on the 28th? Is there a council consensus that we should do the best we can with the comments we've received, and we will make changes to the policies based on the comments we've received? But is there a consensus to schedule this on the 28th?
So this has to have 2 readings, right?
No, this would be just an authorization, so it's not an ordinance.
Okay.
So this is a 1 reading.
1 reading, okay. I guess a little more flexibility. I mean, what do folks think? Do we want, what's that? You want to go forward then? Phil? To vote on it. Other folks?
What's the meeting after the 28th? Is that like the 14th, 12th of November?
So the next meeting after that would be November 12th. And then the one after that is December 9th.
And my point would be, if we don't put it on the 28th, and aside from logistics of trying to now maneuver this into trying to get this fitted in before the end of the year, what more are we going to gain by putting more time into this? I didn't hear any substantive asks this evening, it's just refinement. So. Well, I mean, if you're against it, then you're against it, and that's going to be what it is. And we're not going to change the insurance requirements overnight just to satisfy. I mean, I'm kind of where Mr. Snyder is, that there are going to be issues, and there are going to be some people hurt, and that's just what it is. We can't protect everybody, and we just have to figure out the best way to accommodate all these modes of mobility, because they're here, and they're not going away, and they should be regulated as opposed to unregulated. So.
All right, so 2 for going forward. There, 2, we have 3. Go ahead.
There did seem to be some substantive concerns that were raised that I think would help us get to maybe a closer to a unanimous vote if we were able to see some red line changes addressing a few of those. We may never get to everybody being on board. But that being said, if we're able to fit it in and get it done before that time horizon expires, then I'm happy to put it off. Otherwise, we can see what staff comes up with prior to the 28th and keep it there. So basically, if we have time, let's talk about it and see if we can't address those concerns. Otherwise, I'm okay with, I guess, quote unquote, rolling the dice to make sure that, to see if everything has been accounted for prior to that.
back if staff can give us the red line before, I guess, Wednesday when we post the package, see whether it's ready. If not, we could push it to that November 12th meeting, but.
All right, so it sounds like we had a majority that wants to go ahead and at least attempt to push forward with this, and then if we have concerns of not, we can always push it back some. So why don't we at least shoot for that and see where that takes us? All right, thanks for our friends for joining us and for your input. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for that great staff report and thorough presentation. Let's move on to the last item on our agenda for today, which is the Stormwater Task Force. Mr. Shield.
You can stay if you want.
Where do you want?
All right.
Mayor Tarter, members of council, so the request that's before you on this is to provide input on a draft charter to create a stormwater task force, and then to schedule it for council action at your meeting on the 28th. A little bit of background. We have experienced flooding in the city over the past 2 years. Two notable examples of this have been the Labor Day storms of 2018 and the flood of July 8th of 2019, but there have been others as well. And in response to this recurring flooding, we've had a town hall meeting, and we've had essentially a presentation to the public where we said we will update our list of priority projects that were adopted by the City Council in 2012 with a greater weighting and a greater priority towards protecting private property and public safety with respect to these extreme rain events. So in order to carry that work forward, we're proposing to create a stormwater task force that would work with staff and with the city's engineering consultants to review projects and prioritize them and rank them in terms of their cost effectiveness, in terms of dollars spent and the amount of property protected, and that type of criteria in time for the council's budget deliberations next spring. What we envision, we have already received a scope of work from an engineering firm that would support this effort. We're working through the details of their response to our requested scope of work. Their initial cost estimate to do the engineering work is about $180,000 to provide initial engineering for the 5 study areas that have been described to council at an earlier meeting. And Cindy, maybe if you could have that memo up just so we can remind the council and people watching what those 5 study areas are. But for those 5 study areas, the engineering work that would need to be done is survey work to identify the elevation and the location of existing stormwater infrastructure and the elevations of adjacent properties, the structures, either doorways into basements or window wells into properties, so that we can then do some hydraulic analysis where for the 2-year event, the 10-year event, or the 100-year event, what the pool will be in certain areas, what the flooding would be in certain areas relative to elevations of given properties in the study areas. The engineers will also provide cost estimates for a range of solutions that to lower that flooding elevation that affects those properties. And that with those cost estimates, then we can assess some with some, ideally with some rigor, some cost effectiveness measures to help the council and help the community with prioritization. The basic idea with this task force is to work through this process with us. The basic idea is that if staff did this work alone, come March, we would present to you our recommendations on here are the top things that we should be doing to improve stormwater. And we would think as staff that, hey, this is the kind of the final answer, let's just do this. But in fact, that would likely be the beginning of the discussion. Everybody would ask us questions as to how we came to those conclusions, etc. So if we would do this work in a transparent way with citizen involvement, but in a rigorous and science-driven manner, then we think we can present recommendations that at least we can explain, we can defend, and ideally will have community support. When you look at the charter for this group, you will note that one of its features is that it's a very narrow scope of work, and we've even gone so far as to lay out a series of 4 meetings. First, to get organized. Second, to develop the criteria and sort of the ranking instrument. Then to do a workshop to actually do the ranking. And then fourth, to finalize recommendations. The reason we've tried to think that through is this can be a very controversial and difficult task. The entire city experiences flooding to one degree or another. And we can't study everything, we can't prioritize everything at the same time. But if we do have some criteria that we can explain to the public, and then some data from our engineers as to what can be done to make a difference and improve safety in certain locations, that would be what would be behind these recommendations. We don't know yet what we ultimately will be coming to council for in terms of how much money to do any of these projects. But first, let's do the science, let's do the engineering, let's do it in an open and transparent way, and then we'll talk finance. That's the basic idea. So with this is a charter. If the council authorize this, then we will recruit and promote or publicize the need for citizen volunteers for this. We'll also get our contracting finalized to support the effort, and then by separate action, the council would make the appointments to it. I'm recommending a group no larger than 7 members, but ideally between 5 and 7, and a term that would sunset on July 1, 2020, unless extended by council. So again, a pretty tight scope of work and term of service for this work. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Shields. Why don't we see if anyone has any questions, comments? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I understand that these projects are of a certain characteristics, and they're probably meant to do certain things. So whether we pick at the end of all this 5 projects or expand the list to 10 projects, these are all remedial actions that need to be done in response to some of our citizens that are under duress from abnormal, increasingly normal, abnormal but common weather-related events. As I've said, climate change will continue whether you believe in it or not, and this is one piece of it. So on one hand, there is the Virginia frontier spirit that says, you bought the house, you knew what you're getting into. Your new neighbors told you that we suffer flooding on the street, and you bought the house anyway, it's going to flood. It's your problem, you take care of it. That seems to be unsatisfactory to a lot of people, especially if you're affected by it, and so that line of reasoning probably doesn't make much sense anymore, because at some point this climate change related issue is going to cause all of us to be less resilient. That is to say, probably everybody will suffer flooding. So we take care of those that have the worst, and then we all pay into it, and when it comes our turn to be helped, that we will all be helped in turn. So that's kind of how a community works, a town, a city. So in that regard, I've kind of changed my mind about the Virginia frontier spirit. You cannot put up enough sandbags to stop it. I cannot build a wall high enough between me and my neighbor whose stormwater runs onto my property and floods my basement. I've put in additional outdoor sump pumps and a generator so that when it rains and the water flows into my yard, and if the power goes out, it's all working. And that's my response. So I don't expect everyone to do that. And so when it comes down to this, and we know this, and I think that it should be made known to the citizens that on lines 51 through 53 that whatever projects get adopted, we will increase the fees in the stormwater fund to pay the debt service on the bonds. That's what it is. So we're all going to be paying into this. That's the appropriate mechanism. I don't have a problem with that, but we need to know that's the way forward. And this remedial action, once it's done, there will be more. But I'm after a holistic discussion about climate change, defective zoning, lot coverage, and while we're at it, let's throw in our current policy on how much you retain on site, zoning changes with regard to certain areas that are prone to flooding. There may have to be a tiered approach. Trees, obviously. And finally, sidewalks. Let's make this a holistic solution set that then evolves new sets of policies and decision making so that you're not coming to council every year based on the larger number of citizens that are going to be screaming. And, you know, there's got to be an end to the number of remedial actions that we can take, right? So we need to have a decision-making structure based on strategy that says we affect the following things with regard to the kinds of powers that the city has. Thank you.
All right, other comments? Ms. Sardi?
Great, thank you. Wyatt, did I hear you say 180,000 to get us to kind of a cost for those 5 projects?
Can you pull up Mr. Dalton's memo? And yes, so if you go to the maps, that's probably the easiest way to look at it. And let's start either with Harrison Branch or Trammell Branch. Those are two easy. Go to the maps.
So that's not to do any of the work, it's to kind of figure out what engineering needs to be done and then give us a price tag for each project. Okay.
So it's coming to about it's varying between about 15,000 and 26,000. I'm sorry, $30,000 to $46,000 per study area. A significant part of the work is to do some of the surveying work to locate the structures and to locate the depth of the stormwater infrastructure and confirm everything out in the field, and then to do hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. So if you take this as an example, this is the Trammell Branch. So they would, behind that, basically that constriction point at the WNOD, they would be measuring for the 2-year event, what's the pond behind that constriction point, for the 10-year event, for the 100-year event. And then they will say, well, if you put in a larger pipe, then what does that ponding look like? How relative to the structures that are immediately adjacent? That's the type of product that you will get for the engineering work. For some, for the different study areas, the work is going to be a little different for each study area. This one is kind of a fairly simple one from an engineering perspective.
So my question was really more on the money side. So I think this is getting paid for out of the Stormwater Utility Fund.
That's correct.
So is there anything that we have to deprioritize in order to do this $180,000 worth of new work?
Well, I mean, I think we should begrudge every penny spent for engineering because if we study this forever, we will eat up all of our money, and there won't be any money left to do projects. And so, we have not finalized this contract. We've received it just late last week, and we're now going through the details with it to make sure we're getting the best value for our engineering dollar. we would not need to raise the fee to do the engineering work. The utility fee will cover that. It's really just when we get next year, if we're talking about issuing significant bonds to do the projects, then that's when we'll have a financial model to talk about how we'll pay for it.
But in the interim, there's not another project that was really originally slated to use the money that we're saying, well, we got to wait on this one because we got to go fund this engineering study.
So the expensive project that we're doing right now with existing funds is the Renz Branch project at East Columbia and near Van Buren. That project is being paid for out of the existing balance of the stormwater fund. We also have some smaller operations, so that all will be covered. But once, depending on how we wrap up this engineering contract work, that's really going to take all the cash out of the fund. So additional projects are going to need to be part of that financing discussion next spring.
Okay. Is it in the purview of the task force to identify additional focus areas, or are they only limited to these 5? Are they going to, in the course of discussion, saying, well, what about this one or this one? Because I imagine they will represent different areas of the city, and they may have specific, flood-prone areas.
So that is a very good question. I would like to be able to say, sorry folks, this is it, but that's not really reasonable. I think we need to sit down together and review these areas and make sure we are studying the right areas with all the best information in front of us. These 5 areas were staff driven. They were driven by our experience of what we've seen with our own eyes. It was driven by what we've heard from the community, and it's also driven by the Army Corps of Engineers modeling that was done, and that it's a really good data set that we have for the system. But you could certainly quibble with it. And so that one of our first meetings we'd have with the task force is to review this with them. And the issue will be, if we add additional study areas, then that will cost, we just need to be aware of the cost, and that may also slow down the process.
Okay. And then my last question is similar to Dan's, and reiterating what I said last week as well. This group is great on remediation for issues that we have. I still want to make sure we're paying just as much attention to the root cause, so the upstream issues of stormwater retention requirements, zoning changes, mature tree canopy requirements, those things. And I don't know whether it's in the purview of this task force to tackle, but we keep circling around it. We keep saying, and I think you're hearing from all council, that we want to do more. And I don't know what that more is. I don't know what powers we currently have or what powers we need to be asking for come, General Assembly in January. But I want someone to work on that, because we keep talking about fixing it on the back, but I feel like we need to go upstream as well, literally, and work on it before we actually create more of these issues elsewhere. Because we're just going to add to more study areas over time unless we solve those upstream issues. So I don't know whether we should include it in the charter for this one. That feels like a different scope than looking at flood-prone areas of the city. So maybe it's a different one, or maybe it's staff work. But I've asked about this several times, and I do feel like we do need to pay attention to that a lot more.
I agree, and so I have tried to keep this scope very tight. If we expand it in that direction, then that is very different. And so this work then will get slowed down and deprioritized if this group does that. The other element of it is that everything we do in the zoning and the impervious coverage arena is there's a big state law overhang that we have to comply with, but B, that's a process that touches absolutely everybody in the city, and so we would need to build in enough time to make sure that there's public comment on that as well.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that it probably gets looped into this, because I don't think we want to bog this process down, but somewhere we should solve that. Thank you.
And if I could just add from a timing, as I was talking to Mr. Shields today, we're developing the CIP now, which goes to Planning Commission in February and to Council by the time you take action on budget in April. Some of this is going to have to run separately, because this task force isn't going to have its work done by the time I'm ready to go to Planning Commission. But trying to keep it concise and focused so that you can have that financial decision and adopt it with your budget would be ideal. Otherwise, we have to deal with the city code that requires the CIP to be adopted within 28 days of your operating budget. So that only buys you another month as you're working through this important scope and timing.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks a lot. Wyatt, thank you very much. I think we ought to get moving on this, and I appreciate that you put this together. I was impressed at the public hearing about how many cases of repetitive flooding there's been, not just that one rain event. And I think as I see this project, it's really focused on that. And to me, that is a city infrastructure issue. So I think we have an obligation to address that and address it as rapidly as possible. I also appreciate that you're considering and including costs in this, because there will be a cost, and it's very important to develop public support for whatever cost it is to remedy the issues that have led to repetitive flooding. So the more I look at this, the more I think you've tailored this well. I think I feel a need to get moving as rapidly as possible. I hope we can move more fast than you've laid out here. But I think the elements are there. I think the appropriate focus is there, and I think we ought to get going. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I attended the VML conference with some of my colleagues and sat in on the stormwater presentation. And one thing that caught me by surprise was a specific slide that was brought up during the presentation that was done by the VAMSA, and I cannot remember exactly what association that is, talking about stormwater utility fees, and the City of Falls Church ranks as the highest monthly stormwater fee of any jurisdiction in the state of Virginia. So we can put that in our award case outside of this room. The lowest being Chesterfield, if I recall correctly, and the median being around $5.86. We're at like $21 per month. So a question I would have is, one, I mean, I assume it has to do with our size and just per capita, but one, what are other jurisdictions doing to fund some of these issues? Because, you know, I look at some of our colleagues down in places like Portsmouth and other areas that are low-lying that I would think would have bigger issues than we do, how they're managing their costs and how they're balancing that from a budget perspective. Maybe some mechanics involved in the way that they fund their stormwater that throws that off a little bit, but I thought that was interesting. While I am sensitive to the fact that Mr. Z feels that we inevitably are going to have to raise our stormwater fee, you know, I'm always open to other options. Maybe there are other jurisdictions that have found other ways to fund this type of work. But again, given our stature and size, as 2 square miles, 15,000 residents, any pain like this is felt more acutely than other jurisdictions. I echo Mr. Snyder. I would like to move quickly with this, and I do like the fact that it is transparent. It is driven by the jurisdiction, because there will be winners and losers in terms of projects, because Falls Church city budget is not a money tree. It is not an ATM, and these things will cost money and things will have to be prioritized. So I do like the fact that there is consensus built through this process. One thing that I will raise a point of concern with is conversations about a defined scope. I think it is important for us to narrow that scope to make sure that it stays focused, things move effectively and efficiently through this task force. But I do also want to make sure that if there is consideration for other areas outside of this initial scope, that we tread very carefully with that, because I don't want a task force that ends up prioritizing a project, even though the mandate is to do the greatest good, the most cost-effective manner for the greatest number of people, that we don't end up with a situation where we find a more cost-effective approach to a particular area that falls outside of that mandate. So we're not playing favorites. So I would like to have a defined scope, and I would like that scope to be targeted by city staff that have the engineering chops to be able to define that for this particular task force, because again, it is important that this mandate is carried through to the letter, which is the most cost effective for projects that benefit the greatest number of folks in this city, not for a particular neighborhood that feels that they want more focus than others. But generally speaking, I do support this. One last question. Remind me again, what is our, the funding currently for stormwater that we have in our piggy bank?
If I could get back with you on that exact figure with the annual budget and the amount that's in fund balance in the utility fund.
Okay. All right, great.
All right, who's next?
Could I just make one note in defense of our fee? First, let me just state that we do take the responsibility of this fee very seriously. We want to deliver value for it. But I will note that other jurisdictions have pennies on the tax rate for their stormwater. For instance, Fairfax County's is 3.25 cents on the tax rate that's dedicated to stormwater. So that's very similar to what the actual impact is for our residents. So, I think the fee is actually the most transparent way to fund this service relative to having it in the tax.
I figured there was an explanation.
The state tax.
Yeah, okay.
All right, my questions are more process about this task force. You recommend 5 to 7 members. Would there be a city council member on this task force, or would there be staff leading it? How does that work?
So there would be heavy interaction with staff and the engineering consultant. But the members, I think the appointments should be made by the city council. In the report, the only thing that I recommend is geographical dispersion.
Okay.
And beyond that, in the past we've done things of saying, there's a VPAS member and a representing the faith community and I don't know that that's so important in this effort as the geographical dispersion and people coming to the table with their city hat on as opposed to just that.
Yes. Okay. That's what I was thinking too. Would they go through the appointments committee then? People would apply and then the appointments committee would vet them?
And I could talk with the chair of the appointments committee on sort of, we
Yeah.
haven't had that conversation yet. That's what I envisioned though when this is drafted.
Okay. And so there would not be a city council member liaison on this committee?
That would be up to the city council if you wished
Okay.
to appoint one. But
I
that-
wish that there would, if there is, I wish that that person would not have a vote on this committee, that they would just be a liaison. Just so that it really can be community-driven and consulting to the city council.
And one other thought is the meetings will all be public, and I think it's hoped for that as they're having their workshop, there might be 20 people in the audience watching it and
Right.
learning just as the task force is.
Okay. And then again, on the timing, it would sunset July 1st, which, as Ms. Mester said, makes it hard to know exactly what we're going to be asking for in the upcoming budget. How much of a sense do you think we'll have of how much this will cost by?
Well, so the goal is to have it, have the recommendations ready by March for budget presentation. What is difficult, and I still need to work this through with Cindy and the Planning Commission, is this would be part of the CIP, but I think given our timing, if we can get it done sooner, that would be great. But and talking with the engineering firm, they're saying, folks, it's going to be really tough to get this work done by March. And so, but that's what we're.
Could they do part of it? I mean, I guess that would mean prioritizing
Could.
different neighborhoods.
And that could be part of the initial work of the task force. Do we have the right areas? But if it's a real choice, 5 seems to be a pretty good number to have a real robust set of choices. If it ended up being just 3 study areas, how much choice are you really making?
Right.
That's the worry.
Okay. And then my last question is a suggestion to follow up on what Ms. Hardy said about going upstream and trying to solve those problems. And I think we should make sure to put this in our work plan for next year and ask our boards and commissions as we go forward next year that the Tree Commission and the CACT and others take a look at holistically what we can do throughout the city to reduce some of the stormwater runoff that's happening with redevelopments. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Do you have anything, Mr. Duncan? Okay, so I got a few comments, a few questions. Just ballpark, I know you're going to get back to us with an exact number, but just ballpark, what does the stormwater fee generate into its totality in 1 year about? Do you have an idea, just a rough idea?
Well, I should know that number off the top of my head, but I'm afraid I'm going to give you the wrong number. So but it's over $1 million.
$1 million per year?
Yes, is what's
Okay.
generated for the stormwater utility.
Okay. So a few questions or comments. One, as far as number on the task force, I think one thing you have to do is if you just, let's say, had 5 and you have 5 areas and you have one person from each area, you want to be able to break ties and everybody wants maybe their own project, which is understandable to go forward. So I would give some consideration to having a few people who maybe don't have a dog in that fight, so they kind of look at it maybe a little more holistically. So I think 5 probably is too few folks to have. I think you need a few people who are not just, looking out kind of solely primarily for their own neighborhood, which again would be understandable. But I would give some thought to adding a few more. Are they going to do topo? Are they going to actually be like shooting topo all around these places?
They will be. So they'll be doing 2 things, and this is part of sort of expediency. They're going to be doing survey to get exact elevations of certain physical features, and then they'll use LiDAR to do topo for broader areas.
Are they going to have to enter people's property and get permission from folks to come on their property?
Yes.
All right, that's something I think probably we ought to push out to the neighborhoods that, hey, look, surveyors are going to be coming to your neighborhood to do this and that, because without their cooperation, I think it's going to be difficult for them to do
That's right.
accurate topo for whatever areas they're looking for. Let's see what else we've got here. I do think even though we're talking about 5 sites, we can't forget the big picture, and so it may be you're looking at one thing kind of myopically, but I think we do need to consider that, hey, this thing's tied into this one, and you do something here, you move it there, and I'm not sure how you do that exactly with just, kind of your eyes on 5 particular spots, but I do think that's really important. We don't want to create new problems. Hey, I fixed the problem here, now we got a new spot, so I think not moving something upstream or downstream is going to be critical. But more importantly, just solving the problem. And I don't know exactly how that might be, but it could be additional detention, for example. Because you make a pipe bigger one place, it's going to, wherever the bottleneck is, it's going to be a new place. And so,
They'll be back in phase 2.
yeah, probably. Let me see. But I do agree, we need to accelerate solutions and get this stuff rolling. I mean, there's nothing worse, I think, than having your basement full of all sorts of things that I know folks have had. Anyway, unless there's anything else that anybody has.
Yeah, just a
go
quick comment. Talking about the scoring for this, the scoring that we went through for the evaluation for the West Falls Church site, as well as the school construction project, I thought was useful to create transparency, that entire process. And I can't remember all of it, but I remember that it was pretty well done. And I also think that, going to Mayor Tarter's point, I think expediency should play into that kind of weighted scoring. If you've got something that's cost effective, but it's going to take us 50 years, somehow that needs to be calculated into how we decide, how we prioritize.
Okay, is there any other comments that people want to make on? Sure, go ahead.
It's me again. Hello. Todd Friedlander, 801 Hillwood. Just one comment in general on the criteria and the scope of work. Just looking at it briefly, the couple sentences I saw from my area didn't quite encapsulate all the problems, and it wasn't clear for the scope of work for the engineer. So it might make sense. I know it's kind of goes against this expediency thing, but it might make sense to share some of the scope of work with the listserv of the folks that were there, so they can sort of kind of look at oh no, this is incorrect, or this is not accurate, and that's kind of a weighted thing, because you don't know what people think the problems are. But it would be cheaper, or it's going to be less expensive to nail down the scope of work before you let out the contract than to make adjustments to the scope of work once we're under process. And so there were a couple things on Hillwood that weren't quite reflective, and my assumption is perhaps that's happened in other areas. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for coming out again. Yes, of course.
Hi, Dave Gustafson, 302 West Columbia. Spoken with many of you since July 8th. I've been paying a lot more attention to council meetings and work sessions since then, and I think something that's a recurring topic that comes up is just the need for more communication, and the city's blessed with some excellent communicators, and the focus every Thursday is a must-read in many households I know of, and so the more transparency there can be with everybody, in the city as we figure out how to prioritize some of these. I know, that it's nice to see you again. I've seen you on some the prior meetings as well. It's just making sure that that we're taking full advantage of the the information that citizens have. I know that the folks who live right behind me, who are kind of most affected by the flooding, they are soon to be moving, and so they have a wealth of information that they're sitting on that may be of extra value to the engineers, and they can. And so perhaps there's something that we can do, through the focus, through some of the other cities' communications channels, to make sure that that we can gather, any sort of necessary data from citizens to help kind of gather the amount of damage that has happened over the years to help this new group, however it's composed, gather the information to help them quantify, because I see that that's going to be a major challenge. But we appreciate everything that the city's been doing. Like I told Wyatt, we're very grateful for the new water-resistant manhole covers on West Columbia. We're grateful for all the attention that council's been paying, and we're grateful for all the work that staff's been doing. And it's nice to see that even though we're 3 months past the big flood event, that this is still being taken so seriously. So we appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate your patience and appreciate your participation in the process. Unless there's anything else to be said at this time, why don't we move on to our last agenda item, which is essentially just talking council requests and schedule and updates and the like. Is there anything folks have? While people are thinking about it, I would just note that on Wednesday, we're having our dinner with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, basically in the hall and the patio. That starts at 7. Some of our neighbors from Fairfax County will be here, and all sorts of other folks. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to meet and mingle. I would say probably business casual, something like that. Not black tie unless you want to be, and you look sharp, I know.
Halloween costumes.
So I think the doors open at 6:30, and I think the idea is at 7 is about when we'd start. It's going to be casual. It's essentially going to be mostly a social opportunity for people to meet other folks, elected folks from the area, from Northern Virginia, and have conversations with them and get to know them. And we'll have maybe a small presentation about Falls Church, like we've done at past meetings, and a small presentation about Northern Virginia Regional Commission, what they're going to be working on. But that's pretty much what it's going to be.
Is the presentation in chambers, or
I think we were
here?
talking about doing it in the hall.
In the hallway?
Yeah, just on like a monitor or screen or something like that, kind of like we've done with our other folks.
Yeah, so the dinner and all will be out there, and I'm working with IT and Celeste to work on how to do the presentation in the lobby, and then a tour that you can show off chambers. And so.
Great. Mr. Snyder?
Two
Then
quick-
Ms. Hardy after that. Or go ahead.
Two quick things. I'll be out of town on job-related travel, so Wednesday, so I'm sorry to miss that, but that's reality. Secondly, I may miss the October 28th meeting. I'm out of town, job-related travel, attending an OECD session on green investment. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
To continue on our traffic calming discussion, Wyatt, I want to make sure you saw there was a request from Berry Street about enforcement and concerns on Berry, Cleve, and that kind of loop off Hillwood. I think a lot of people cut through there. So I CC'd you and Chief Gavin on that. I expect a petition coming in from Rosemary. So I think given all the attention that we've been giving to traffic calming, more streets are coming forward. So I expect Rosemary to come forward, but I think that raises the question because...
Did you talk to her, Rosemary? Sorry. Sorry. All right.
It raises the topic we had about bundling the streets, because I think Greenway and Cameron, or Greenway and one of the other streets is in one of the projects in queue that's going to get work. And so Rosemary is going to come, Jackson's probably is going to be right behind it, which then brings up Marshall and then all the streets off 29. So I feel like instead of tackling them one off, which I think we're taking care of two of them as the, here's the stuff that's in the queue. If we're going to get, a loud and very visible request from Rosemary, we should have a plan on what to do about all of them because we know it's coming. So, as a resident who lives there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to add, but I think it's more of a...
Do we have any reports or updates on spot enforcement? I know that we were having police out on Nolan Street, but I had been request about possibly having the sheriff's department participate to get more actual patrol cars writing tickets out on the streets. I was on the way here, walking down Oak Street. Papa John's delivery guy blew through both stop signs on Oak Street, well over 40 miles an hour.
The pizza was still cold.
Called them.
Pizza
Actually
was still
called the
cold.
store on the way here. Yep.
For years, on West Street, we called whatever it was, Domino's or whatever it was back then. They finally kind of read the riot act.
We need to have, I just want to have more spot, and listen, I know that we have staffing issues as it is, but that spot enforcement makes a difference, and for those cut-through streets on that side of the city, I'd really like to see a sheriff's vehicle, something unmarked, police officer there rotating through these streets and not just kind of posted up once in a while on Nolan or some of the other more problem areas as well.
So the vice mayor also asked me earlier about getting more snacks for the chamber. So
I was not paying attention. What is all this?
she was hungry. She was
if
hungry.
these were scooters, this would be a
Yeah,
corral
this-
of trash.
Cut it in
She was just
one.
really hungry today. So.
This is-
None are my bags.
Oh,
none.
come on,
The records
stop.
show that.
Going back to the enforcement, though, like if we are putting police out there, can we tell people? Because I feel like people keep asking, and we need to either give ourselves credit that we're actually putting them out there and writing tickets and being responsive. But I don't think people realize that if it's happening, whether it is or not.
So that is the program. We have the city has traditionally had a traffic enforcement detail where the officers keep logs of their enforcement activities in certain hot spots that are usually citizen or resident driven, and then we report out to the residents after we've met with them. Here's what we've done over the last 2 weeks. Here's how many hours we spent here. Here's how many citations were issued. In terms of the staffing issue, we do not currently have that traffic enforcement officer, but we will get it reinstated. But we are, so the police are hearing all the calls, and it's not new. I mean, these calls have always been there. But that process of communicating back with the neighbors of, we heard you, and so here's what we did in response, that's the piece that we have let drop probably in the last 2 years, 18 months. So we're getting that started back up again, and Nolan is an example of that, but it's not just Nolan.
It would be great. It's just to have a schedule, even like we're going to these 5 days a week. On Monday we're going to be on Nolan. On Tuesday we're going to be on Greenway. Wednesday we're going to be on Marshall. Whatever it is, and so people would actually know what the schedule is, and then people have an idea that people are out there. You can publicize it on the website. Anyway, I do think we ought to have a greater presence on our side streets and maybe not so much on Broad Street. Seems like there's more issues on the side streets. But anyway. All right, is there anything else people want to say? Vice Mayor Connolly?
Last week, we approved a library contract 4-2, and that we asked for a provision to be inserted that no more than $5,000 would be spent. And Ms. McCroskey indicated she wasn't sure that could actually go into the contract. And I'm just looking for an update, because my impression was that we asked for that to be in there, or else it wouldn't go through.
Let me get back with you on that.
Thanks.
All right, is there anything else?
Not everyone has written about the signal at West and Broad, who lives south of Broad Street, but we're working our way up, I think. So sometime, perhaps, whatever the challenge is there, that short cycles light going northbound, it would be lovely to be able to tell people that we have at least tried to fix it.
The issue is also going westbound and turning left on Southwest. We got an email about that.
Yeah, it's same thing, yeah. I've scheduled a question about November 18th. I've seen email traffic about some event, which sounds like a nice event out at George Mason that honors Sharon Bulova and other retarees, which is, open to all electeds. And several people have said they want to go, and I'd like to go too, but it's on the night of a work session. What are we doing about that? Are we going? Tarter, have you seen this?
I've seen you talking about the Shar or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah, look, I've seen it. I mean, we can reschedule our work session if people want to do it, or we can just.
Everybody has said they want to go.
Reception that ends at 6:30, so you have enough time to get back. It's
So what time's the reception start?
5:30, 6:30,
Yeah. I RSVP'd that I would be there for the reception and be leaving at 7.
So what are people not eating dinner? Is that what I hear?
Which
We
night
got
is it?
snacks.
No, I'm not, we're not we're telling them we're
You
not
already
staying
eat
for
so
the
crazy
dinner.
here.
That's
That's
the-
the new member thing in advance.
Right, I know, but I'm not a new member, so I'm not eligible for that, so the idea is you go at 5:30 and you nibbles and you try to wave at
Wrap
the
up some food.
honorees and then you leave.
Well, Ross, do they serve lunch at the new member thing?
Wait out your relatives, okay?
Well, then I would submit that, Mr. Duncan could be a new member just for the day.
I'll put some sandwiches in my pocket.
Yeah, I if that's all we're gonna do, I don't think I'm gonna make the trip all the way out to George Mason in rush hour to, break bread for an hour.
Wasn't
Okay.
it Arlington last time? I thought they did it already. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it's at the law, or whatever the old law is
I'll
called.
give you a ride if you want.
Okay, all right, well, maybe I will. The EDC meets Thursday at 9 o'clock. We're hearing from the Woodmont folks who have the Spectrum space and the West End Shopping Center again, and also the Federal Realty representative, the new woman who is running the Giant to Staples property, mostly about current situations there. We hopefully will get into the future a little bit, and then we're also going to talk about a city economic indicators dashboard that Ms. Hardy and Mr. Pelton have worked up, and just begin to try to come up with something that will help us quantify our economic progress here. If anybody wants to come, you're welcome.
All right, anything else?
Move to adjourn, Mayor.
All right, let's do-
Mayor, sorry. I was waiting to go through council. We do have a letter that I would like to recommend. We sent to Governor Northam. I sent it out this afternoon quickly to your legislative committee because I just received it. You have a hard copy at the desk. It's one that the Northern Virginia legislative liaisons have put together with some consensus to advocate that he include in the budget the cost of living for support personnel, which would be really critical for our school budget, and also to restore our NVTA funding. So I would like council's consensus to allow the mayor to sign this letter with your other neighboring peers, so we can get it down to the governor while he's developing his budget.
Mr. Mayor, I like the letter. I think we should go ahead with it. I also wanted to mention the Route 50 project and Fairfax County, and we need some sort of a process on that.
Yeah, we do have that planned Ring Road resolution on November 12th for your regular meeting to be talking
So-
about that.
Yeah, so we want to talk about that beforehand, then we
Yep.
don't just spring it on everybody at a reg. Let's do
And-
that in work session.
And along with Mr. Snyder's assistance, the TPB has reached out to have some staff planning meeting for long-range planning. But the letter was my time-sensitive one for this evening.
Good letter, Cindy.
All right, anything else?
I think we should sign on.
All right. All right. Anything else, everyone?
Go Nats.
Okay. All right, let's adjourn.
Do it.